Hi, class. We're continuing our discussion here on the material or the class, I should say. The This week we're covering, excuse me, covering a couple things. It says integers, algebraic expressions, but the continuation is we're going to be looking at order of operations, kind of the process, how do you work through it, going through sort of the steps, if you will. And here is generally speaking, the order of operations. And by the way, you know this already. You probably familiar with the notion of what we say PEMDAS, PEMDAS. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Uh, is probably the most common way we tend to remember it. So how does this work out? Well, it says, first of all, excuse me, do all the parentheses first. That's always the first step. Simplify what's in the parentheses until you get it down to a single value. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Then the second step is going to be work with the exponents. That's the E part, work with the exponents. You'll see that when we talk about the exponents, we're also talking about square roots that may exist in the problem as well. And you'll at this time want to go ahead and do the absolute values. Now, one other thing, by the way, is that absolute values are also parentheses. So actually, this probably should be in this step right here, because while absolute value is an operation that we talked about previously, it is sort of a grouping symbol as well. We'll see some examples of that. Now, when we get to step 3, you'll notice you'll perform the multiplication and division. So even though the M and D look like separate steps here when we talk about PEMDAS, they really are a part of the same step, the third step here. And the notion here is that you perform the multiplication or division as it appears from left to right, as it appears from left to right. So there are times, just to kind of give you a heads up, where you will do division before you do multiplication because it appears first in the problem as you go left to right. And similarly, step 4 here, you do the addition and subtraction. So the AS is also one step. Again, like multiplication division, you will do addition and subtraction as it appears from left to right. So to kind of build upon that, there are times where you would do subtraction before you would do addition, and we'll see some examples of that. So generally speaking, do parentheses, then exponents, then multiply, divide, left to right, then add, subtract, left to right. That's kind of the quick way of summarizing it. So let's see. So really what we're going to be doing here over the next just a few minutes is to look at some examples. And what you're going to have to remember from all this is our previous discussion about working with integers, positive numbers and negative numbers, the rules for adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, positives and negatives. Okay, so let's take a look at this one. And here what we're going to have in mind is we're going to keep, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, in mind, and please excuse my poor handwriting. I apologize for that. So when we talk about the parentheses step, we see that we have parentheses right here. Okay, so we're going to be doing those. So before we do anything though, take everything else and rewrite it. Take everything else and rewrite it because nothing else is going to change. The only thing that's going to change is what's in the parentheses. Okay, we're going to leave like a blank for it. So now that we have everything rewritten, now we do the 7 minus 5 inside the parentheses, and that's going to give us a 2. Okay. Now, are we done with the parentheses step? I mean, I still have a parentheses written there, but what do we do? Well, here, and that's a common question to get, so that's why I want to pose it like that, is at this point, we are done with the parentheses step. Why? Because you work the parentheses until you got the parentheses simplified down to a single value, or a single value remains inside the parentheses. Once you achieve that step, you're done with the parentheses, and then you move on. Bear with me. Okay, so then what's next? Exponent is next. Okay, so remember exponents are those like little numbers, that are hanging out at the top. We don't have any exponents in this problem, so we can go ahead and be done with that one as well. Okay, so now we move on to multiplication division. Do we have any multiplication? Do we have any division? Sometimes you'll have one, sometimes you have the other, sometimes you have both, sometimes you'll have none. You just have to go through and ask. And here we do have multiplication. you know, when you have six next, the six next to the parentheses indicates multiplication. We don't have division though, so we don't have to worry about this left-right rule. It's just we do the multiplication. And so the multiplication is going to be here. And so we just go ahead and bring down the negative 12. Now we do this as -6 times +2. And remember your rules of multiplying different signs. That becomes a -12. So exponent done, multiplication done. There is no division, so we're done with that. Now we're done. Now we're down to addition, subtraction. Do we have any addition? Do we have any subtraction? The answer is yes. You could do this on your calculator from this point, certainly fine. But remember what we did last week is, not last week, the last instructor session is we attached this minus sign here to the 12 as a negative and injected an addition in there. Okay, so we turned subtraction into addition. That's why they're really the same step. Addition and subtraction are really the same thing. Now we apply our rules for adding numbers of the same sign. And remember what that is? You add the values like you normally would and attach the common sign. And there it is. That's the final answer right there. So what we're seeing here is how do you apply the order of operations? How does parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract actually work? This is just to start getting you used to seeing that process. So let's keep going. See some more examples. So this is a good one to work. So we have 6 plus 48 divided by 4 times -2. And that is a time symbol there. We don't always write it, but it's written right here. So again, let's do our parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. Okay. So do we have parentheses? And while we do have a value written inside of the parentheses, we don't do the parentheses step because remember the goal. The parentheses step, you do that if there's multiple numbers or multiple things to do inside the parentheses. Here there's not. It's already reduced down to a single number. So we don't have to do the parentheses step. Exponents, do we have any exponents? Nope, no exponents on this one. So we go ahead and just strike that one out. Multiply, divide. Do we have multiplication and division? Here we have both. There's multiplication right here between the 4 times and the -2, and we have division right here between the 48 and the 4. So what do? Do we do multiply first and then division? The answer is no. Remember the rule, and I'm going to help to remind you of the rule, is you do the multiplication division as it appears from left to right. So look through the problem, go left to right through the problem, and you do the multiplication division as it appears, as you hit it. So here, the first thing we come across is the division. That's the thing we're going to do first. So we divide 48 and the 4. So bring everything else down, 6 plus, and then the times -2. And here, we're going to do the 48 divided by 4, and that's going to give us the 12. So the division is done before the multiplication in this case. Now we do the multiplication right here, 12 times -2. So we bring down the 6 plus. So 12 times -2 is -24. So now multiplication is done. Addition, subtraction, we just have addition. So we don't have subtraction, don't have to worry about that one. Do the addition, and this gives us -18. So this one here, the reason for this example is to show you the left-right rule for multiplication and division. And similarly, let me do the next example. We want to show you the left-right rule for addition and subtraction as well. Let me kind of jump to that one. Where is it? Okay, well, just like addition and subtraction, we do the same thing. So okay, we could, well, let's do this one. Well, let me kind of move on, actually. I don't want to take up too much of your time. Okay, let's do this one. Oh, this is a good one too. So we're going to do PEMDAS, PEMDAS. We're doing order of operations. Just keep that in mind. Do we do parentheses? Well, we have a parentheses right here. Is there something to do in the parentheses? The answer is yes. There's subtraction to do. So bring everything else down. 3 squared minus 10 squared. Everything else comes down. And here, we're just going to bring that down. Now we do the parentheses step, simplify that down to -5. Parentheses is done. Do we have exponents? Yes, we do. We have an exponent here and we have an exponent here. Okay, so this one is 3 squared. Remember if we do that over to the side here, let me change my color ink. 3 squared, this is my scratch sheet of paper over here. Remember 3 squared is 3 times 3, and that gives us 9. So that's what we're going to replace right there. And what about the 10 squared? That's just 10 times 10. And that's going to give us 100. So this is our scratch sheet of paper over here. Notice I did not bring the minus sign over when I did 10 squared. Why? Because in our last discussion, we talked about, is the minus sign included inside parentheses or not? And here, because the minus sign here is not inside parentheses with the 10, we don't square it. We leave it alone. So when we do that, then we get, let me change ink color. Okay, so we get 9 here minus 100 here divided by -5. Exponent done. Multiply, divide. Well, we don't have multiplication in this case. We do have division right here, okay? So how do we do the division? A couple things to keep in mind, or one thing to take note of. Keep in mind that the sign in front of a number is attached to it as the sign itself. So here, when we do the division here, we're going to treat it as -100 divided by -5, okay? So negative divided by negative turns to positive. 100 divided by 5 is 20. So that was the key there. That was the catch, is doing this negative and this negative in the division step. And then we simplify this and we get down to 29. Okay, and so just take it one step at a time. Notice here, I'm not trying to do multiple steps in one thing. One step at a time is the way that you want to proceed on these. It helps you to keep track of your signs, helps you to keep track of kind of what's going on in the problem too. So in other words, be patient, don't rush. It's sometimes hard to resist. I get it. I do it too. I'm an impatient person. As much as I try to tell my kids to be patient, it's still a lesson I've got to learn myself. But it really does pay off in these sorts of problems. Okay, let's get a little more complex here. Something like this. And here, what we're going to show you is how does the presence of an absolute value change things? And then the other thing we're going to take a look at is here, look, we got parentheses inside of parentheses. How does that affect the process? So again, let's keep our process in mind. We're going to write PEMDAS up here so that we don't lose track of it. And we're going to go step by step by step. Parentheses. Okay, we're going to do A. Okay. So even though this is an absolute value, you treat it like a parentheses, actually. You treat it like a grouping symbol. So we will simplify this part first inside. So when we do that, everything else remains the same. Now, when we do this, we're going to keep the absolute value. We don't change that. We're just simplifying the 8 and the 24 on the inside. And when we do that, -8 plus positive 24 becomes what? Positive 16. Now, so we're done with the parentheses step because we got that down to a single number. Now the exponent step, this is where you actually apply the absolute value. So take the 16 there. And then we have an exponent down here too. It's just the 3 that's raised to the second power, not the minus. So we just write the minus, and 3 squared becomes 3 times 3, which is 9. So exponent's done. Multiply, divide. One thing to recall from our the last Zoom video is that the fraction bar is treated as division. But before you can do that, is you have to treat the denominator, you have to get the denominator down to a single value, the numerator down to a single value, and the denominator down to a single value. So in other words, there is sort of like an implied parentheses here. So my point is, when you have something that's written as a fraction, get the numerator simplified to a single number and the denominator simplified to a single number. So 5 minus 9 here becomes -4. Now we can do the division, and that becomes -4. That simplifies down to -4. So that's one thing I did forget, and that was actually one of the points of the problem, is to sort of treat the denominator as an implied parentheses. And the reason for that is before you can simplify the fraction, you have to get the top and the bottom down to a single number. Okay, let's see one more here where we actually have parentheses inside parentheses. And we go back to order of operations, PEMDAS. And here, obviously, we have parentheses, but we have parentheses inside parentheses. So what do? What you do is you work your way from the inside out. So you're going to start with these parentheses, and then you're going to work your way outward. So because we're starting with the -7 minus 5, everything else is going to be recopied and doesn't change. So I'm just going to write a blank for that. But I'm just going to keep a blank here, and that whatever the answer is going to go in there, but everything else remains the same. So now I do -7 minus 5, and that becomes -12. Now I do these 8 plus the -12, so everything else is going to remain the same. So the 5 minus 2 bracket. Now this 8 plus -12, remember adding numbers of different signs? You subtract the values and attach the sign of the higher value. So here, that becomes -4. Now we're done with the parentheses step because it's just down now to a single value inside there. That means we're done. And we can move on. There's no exponents. Is there any multiplication or division? The answer is yes. There is multiplication right here. And remember the sign in front, the minus sign in front is treated as a negative attached to the 2. So we do the multiplication, -2 times -4 gives us a +8. So exponents multiply, divide, and then we finish with the addition, and that gives us 13. Okay, all done, all done. Okay, and that's what I wanted to show you here is, it was these applications here of the order of operations, the steps. And what does it mean to be a parentheses? Remember, the parentheses step, remember, is you simplify the parentheses down to a single value and treat absolute values as kind of like grouping symbols, parentheses as well. When you do the multiply, divide, or even the add, subtract steps, remember you do the multiplication division as it appears left to right. And similarly for addition, subtraction, do it from left to right. And that's going to get tested on quite a bit in this week's material. So I hope you found this helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. Be glad to lend a hand with everything. Have a good day.